In the blazing heart of the northern Arizona desert, a circus unlike any other rolls into town. Bright lights, cotton candy, laughter, but behind the grease paint smiles and juggling acts hides a nightmare. These clowns aren't comedians, they're killers. Years ago, a prison bus crashed on a lonely desert road. The inmates vanished into the night. When the cops searched, they found nothing. The trail went cold until the circus was born. The escaped convicts had found old costumes in a rotting barn and realized no one looks twice at a clown. They took the disguise and ran with it. At first it was just an act to stay hidden, but soon they had crowds, they had tents, they had a full traveling circus funded by robberies, bribes, and fear. The lion tamer was a convicted murderer. The juggler once practiced with knives on people. The ringmaster led prison riots with the same booming voice that now bellows, "Ladies and gentlemen, step right up." But here's the thing. Wherever this circus goes, people disappear. Rumors spread. The sheriff looks the other way, and the convicts laugh behind painted faces, knowing no one suspects a thing. Until one night, a journalist sneaks into the tents and sees it all. Hidden guns, mugshots taped to dressing room mirrors, cages that aren't just for animals. What happens next? A chase through the big top, lions on the loose, bullets ripping through striped canvas, and clowns laughing like hyenas as the desert swallows the sound. Some say the journalist made it out, some say he didn't, but the circus still runs, drifting from town to town. So the next time you see a clown smile, ask yourself, is it makeup or a mask hiding a fugitive's grin? Years ago, long before the circus became a household name across desert towns, a prison transport bus was barreling down a lonely Arizona highway. Inside sat some of the most violent criminals the state had ever known. Murderers, arsonists, thieves. Chains rattled as the bus swayed under the weight of heat and distance. But that night, the desert swallowed more than sand. A sudden storm rolled in, lightning cracking against the mesas. The bus driver lost control on a washed-out stretch of road. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and the bus flipped into the darkness. When the dust settled, emergency crews found nothing. No guards, no inmates, no bodies. The prison chalked it up as a disaster where everyone must have perished, their bones buried beneath the sand. But the truth was far worse. The inmates had crawled from the wreckage alive, injured but free, and they vanished into the desert like phantoms. For weeks they hid, living off stolen supplies, raiding empty farmhouses, and leaving a trail of fear across northern Arizona. Then, one night, they stumbled upon a crumbling barn on the edge of an abandoned fairground. Inside, covered in dust, were boxes of old circus costumes, cracked grease paint, and moth-eaten wigs. Something clicked. If they dressed like clowns, no one would recognize them. The disguise was absurd, but it worked. At first, they only used the costumes to rob travelers and slip past sheriffs. But the more they played the role, the more convincing they became. juggling, fire-breathing, knife-throwing, talents born not of entertainment, but survival. Then came the idea that changed everything. Why not put on shows? It would give them cover, money, and a way to travel town to town without suspicion. And so, the Desert Circus was born. But this was no ordinary circus. The performers weren't trained acrobats or entertainers. They were killers hiding in plain sight, their every laugh echoing with malice. And as crowds began to cheer, the fugitives realized something terrifying. They didn't just want to hide anymore, they wanted power. Over the years, what started as a desperate disguise twisted into something bigger, something monstrous. The fugitives sharpened their acts with a predator's precision. The knife thrower could split a playing card in half, his blades honed from years of stabbing cellmates. The fire breather's act came from prison riots, where he'd torch homemade weapons with stolen chemicals. The ringmaster's booming voice, once used to rally inmates during bloody yard fights, now commanded gasps and cheers beneath the big top. Audiences adored them. Families lined up at the ticket booths, never questioning the circus that appeared overnight and vanished just as quickly. The performers became local legends, drifting from dusty town to dusty town across Arizona. Their arrival, bringing excitement, wonder, and a gnawing unease that no one dared speak aloud, because something always followed in their wake. People went missing, travelers vanished, and anyone who asked too many questions simply didn't wake up the next morning. Behind the candy-colored tents, the circus grounds were a fortress. Hidden compartments in trailers held rifles and pistols, stolen cash stuffed inside, cotton candy barrels, knives sharpened on grindstones between shows. The animals, lions, tigers, even a sickly elephant, weren't bought legally. They were stolen, smuggled in under the cover of night. Each creature starved, beaten, and twisted into a sideshow weapon if the circus needed protection. On the surface, it was all laughter and applause. Beneath it, the circus had become something far darker. An organized criminal empire on wheels. The convicts weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving, feeding off the blind trust of their cheering audiences. And each night, as the desert winds howled outside the striped tents, they painted on their grotesque smiles, hiding the blood that never quite washed off their hands. As the years passed, the desert circus grew bolder. Their tents got bigger, their shows more elaborate, and their trail of secrets more impossible to ignore. In tiny Arizona towns where nothing ever happened, rumors began to spread. Families whispered about travelers who went to the circus but never returned. Store owners swore money vanished from their tills after the performers passed through. And, in the dead of night, locals claimed they heard screams muffled by the roar of lions carried on the desert wind. Sheriffs tried to investigate, but the circus always stayed one step ahead. Deputies who asked too many questions were bribed, blackmailed, or made to disappear. One sheriff from a dusty town near Holbrook came within inches of exposing the truth, until his patrol car was found abandoned on a back road, the seats smeared with grease paint handprints. His case was quietly closed. The circus rolled on, and no one dared mention it again. The longer the convicts played their roles, the more their disguises consumed them. They weren't just hiding anymore. They had become their characters. The sad clown who once strangled a cellmate now wept on cue for roaring audiences. The juggler who used to toss shivs for sport dazzled crowds with gleaming blades that glinted like teeth under the floodlights. And the ringmaster, he stood taller than ever, his booming voice shaking the earth as if he commanded the desert itself. People stopped questioning the disappearances. They stopped questioning the circus. Fear kept them silent, and in that silence, the fugitives thrived. They weren't just criminals on the run anymore. They were legends in grease paint, a nightmare hiding behind laughter. Was a journalist who finally pushed too far. He'd been following the circus for months, piecing together scraps of rumors, police reports, and missing person cases. On a hot August night, he slipped past the ticket booth and into the maze of trailers behind the tents. What he found was worse than anything he'd imagined. Inside the dressing rooms, mugshots of escaped inmates were pinned to cracked mirrors, half covered by grease paint smudges. Weapons gleamed under harsh bulbs, revolvers stashed in makeup kits, shotguns hidden beneath sequined costumes. In a side tent, cages stood empty, their iron bars bent as if something or someone had broken free. And on one wall, taped up like trophies, were clippings of newspaper articles about the prison bus crash. The headline, "Inmates Presumed Dead." The convicts had kept it like a badge of honor. The journalist barely had time to snap a few photos before he heard it, footsteps, then laughter, low at first, then louder, until it echoed from every direction. The convicts knew he was there. Suddenly, the tents erupted in chaos. Lions were released from their cages, roaring as they tore through the big top. Trapeze artists swung from the rafters, not to perform, but to chase him down like predators circling prey. The crowd screamed, believing it was all part of the act, never realizing bullets were shredding the striped canvas above their heads. The journalist ran, stumbling through the sand, the night filled with the shrieks of animals and the manic cackles of clowns in pursuit. Fire breathers spat flames to block his path, knife throwers sent steel flashing through the dark, and all the while, the ringmaster's booming voice roared above it all. "Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the show." The journalist stumbled through the sand, his camera bag clutched tight against his chest. Behind him, the desert glowed with fire. The circus had become an inferno of roaring lions, screaming crowds, and convicts painted in neon grins. He thought he was free when he reached the edge of the desert road, his car just in sight. But then headlights flared. A battered circus truck blocked his escape. The driver stepped out, face painted white with a dripping red smile, and whispered through clenched teeth, "Show's not over." What happened next is still debated. Some say the journalist managed to slip away into the night, his story later published in fragments, warning anyone who would listen about the nightmare circus hiding in Arizona. Others swear he was dragged back into the big top, where the convicts erased every trace of his existence, turning his body into another secret buried beneath the desert sand. But one thing is certain: the circus never stopped. To this day, locals tell stories of striped tents rising overnight on the edges of forgotten towns. Children vanish, travelers disappear, and at dusk, the desert wind sometimes carries laughter, high, shrill, and wrong. Painted faces grinning in the dark, watching, waiting, moving ever closer. So if you ever see a circus rolling to your town, with faded trailers and clowns whose eyes never blink, think twice before you buy a ticket, because under the paint, behind the laughter, they aren't performers at all. They're fugitives,